Have you ever imagined a mother who, even while living in the middle of poverty and violence, found in her own garage the space to change the destiny of dozens of children? A woman who turned pain into strength and silence into learning. This is the story of Camila, a brave mother who decided that her daughter and the forgotten children of her community would not be left without a future. But in the middle of this fight, an unexpected companion appeared, a stray Labrador, just as wounded as they were, who would become the guardian and symbol of hope behind the project. Get ready, because what began as a simple garage became much more than a school. It became a miracle of love, courage, and unity. In a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Mexico City, nestled between dusty roads, peeling facades, and relentless honking, lived Camila Herrera, a woman with a determined gaze, calloused hands, and a heart that, though scarred by time and hardship, still beat with the fierce strength of someone who would never give up on protecting what she loves. Camila was the kind of mother who knew the value of a shared piece of bread, a timely conversation, and a tight hug before bedtime. She was, as they say around there, una madre de verdad. The house where she lived with her daughter, Lucía, was simple, but always smelled of coffee in the morning and hot soup at night. Camila, widowed since Lucía was only 3 years old, had learned to walk alone with her daughter in her arms and the weight of the world on her back. Her husband had been yet another victim of the violence that had haunted the city streets for years. She had cried, yes, for weeks, but then she wiped her tears with a dish towel and decided that, if it was for Lucía, no sorrow would ever make her stop. Camila worked as a seamstress from home. She had an old sewing machine inherited from her mother, which ran on sheer stubbornness and cooking oil. Sometimes she would sew until the early hours, her fingers wounded by needles and her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but with the certainty that Lucía would never leave home without a clean uniform and a snack in her backpack. But times changed. The pandemic came like a storm. Schools shut down, work vanished, and Camila watched life tighten its grip once again. What hurt her most, however, wasn't the lack of money, but the sadness in Lucía's eyes when she could no longer go to school. She had always been a curious girl, full of a desire to learn, and now spent her days silent, lying on the couch or playing alone in the dusty backyard. And Camila started to notice something that had once seemed invisible. Lucía wasn't the only one. The neighborhood kids wandered aimlessly through the streets, some far too young to be alone, others already flirting with dangerous paths. None of them were studying. None of them had access to a cell phone or the internet. School had vanished for them, as if it had never existed. Camila couldn't sleep well. Something gnawed at her, a feeling of helplessness, as if she were watching a fire and had no bucket, no water, no scream loud enough to stop it, until one random dawn, between one stitch and the next, she stopped. She looked out the living room window and saw her empty garage, with only a few old boxes and tools lying around. The dim streetlight filtered in through the dusty pane, and in that silence, she heard something within her, something that felt almost like divine intuition. Transform this. In the days that followed, the idea grew. She didn't know where to start, but she knew what she wanted: to turn that old garage into a classroom. Even without a degree, even without resources, even without anyone saying, "It'll work." What she had was love. And for a brave mother like Camila, that had always been enough to begin. With an old broom, she started by cleaning every corner of the garage. She removed the boxes, scrubbed the floor with coconut soap, and hung colorful cloths over the windows as curtains. She asked a neighbor who was a carpenter to help her build a table from reclaimed wood. Over time, other neighbors offered to help. One donated some plastic chairs. Another brought leftover printer paper and pencils from his son. And little by little, what had once been a forgotten space began to fill with purpose. Lucía was the first student. Soon after came 2 more children, daughters of a friend of Camila's. Then came the kids of the woman who sold tortillas on the corner. Before they knew it, there were 10 little ones sitting on mismatched chairs with crumpled notebooks, curious eyes, and hearts hungry for attention. Camila painted a chalkboard with white paint on an old piece of wood. She put up handmade posters with alphabet letters, drawings of fruits, numbers, everything made by hand, with care. She started teaching what she remembered from school, researched at the community library, wrote lessons by hand every night. She gave classes Monday through Friday, and on Saturdays, she told stories. Sometimes she brought a pot of rice pudding or hibiscus juice to brighten the breaks. The children began to transform. Joy returned to the street. What was once silence and neglect turned into laughter and singing. Then one scorching afternoon, Camila heard a strange sound coming from the side of the garage. A low, dragging whimper. She thought it was a cat, but when she got closer, she found a Labrador dog lying between 2 trash bags, thin, filthy, and with sunken eyes. It was impossible to tell where she'd come from, but it was clear she had come from suffering. Camila knelt down slowly. The dog trembled, curled up. She extended her hand gently and said, with the softest voice she could muster, "Hey, Chiquita, you're scared, huh? But no one's gonna hurt you here." She called Lucía, who ran to the gate. When she saw the dog, her eyes lit up. Without a second thought, she rushed inside and came back with a bowl of water and a piece of bread. She sat next to her mother and stayed there, whispering to the dog as if they'd been childhood friends. That very night, Camila bathed her with gentle soap, dried her off, and laid her on an old blanket. She named her new friend Canela, Cinnamon, because of the golden, albeit faded, tone of her fur. In the following days, Canela became a constant presence in the classes, in the garage. She'd lie in the corner of the room, head resting on her paws, always alert to the children's movements. When one of them cried or fell, she was the first to approach, to lick and comfort. The children grew to love her as their mascot, and Camila considered her part of the team. Lucía said Canela made her feel safer. Camila silently knew that this animal had arrived for a reason much bigger than affection. It was as if, in that Mexican backyard, 2 different forms of abandonment had found each other. The stray dog and the woman the world insisted on forgetting. And together, they were building a new future, not just for themselves, but for dozens of children invisible to society. Over time, the garage could barely fit so many kids. Camila began to dream of expanding the space, getting volunteers, seeking help from an NGO. She didn't know how yet, but deep down, something told her, this school will grow, and it will change lives. And every time fear crept in, every time exhaustion hit, she looked at Canela sleeping on the makeshift rug, surrounded by children petting her like a 4-legged angel, and found strength because there, in that small improvised space, a project was being born, one made of courage, of motherhood, of faith, and of a whole lot of love. And this wasn't even the beginning of Camila's greatest challenge. Mornings in San Miguel, the neighborhood where Camila lived, started to take on a new sound. It was no longer just the noise of honking, street vendors, and radios blasting rancheras at full volume. Now, amidst all of that, echoed the laughter of children running to Camila's garage, carrying worn-out notebooks and pencils barely with tips. It was a beautiful, almost poetic scene. Boys and girls who once wandered aimlessly now had a place where they belonged. And in that setting, Canela, the rescued Labrador, always appeared first, running ahead as if calling each one for another day of learning. But not everything was joyful. The project's unexpected growth brought a weight Camila never imagined she'd carry. The first difficulty was the physical space. The garage, even tidied up, could no longer hold so many children. In just a few months, the number jumped from 10 to nearly 30. The plastic chairs were too few, and many had to sit on the floor, leaning on notebooks or wooden crates. The heat inside was suffocating, and the old fan, borrowed from a neighbor, barely managed to cool the air. Camila juggled everything. She organized the children in shifts, some in the morning, others in the afternoon. But even so, the line of little ones at her door kept growing. Mothers from the community began knocking on her door, begging for their children to be accepted too. And how could she say no? Camila knew every story, every pain. She knew of homes with not enough food, of parents who worked all day long, and of those who, sadly, were either imprisoned or dead. Then came the second obstacle: prejudice and distrust. Some people in the neighborhood didn't view the project favorably. A group of men who spent their days playing dominoes on the corner said Camila was trying to be fancy, that those kids would never learn anything in a filthy garage. A neighbor even insinuated that she was doing it for personal gain, to become famous or make easy money. Camila listened in silence, not because she didn't want to respond, but because she knew her strength didn't lie in angry words. It lay in the quiet actions that changed the world little by little. Still, the criticism hurt. At night, when Lucía was already asleep and Camila curled at the foot of the bed, Camila allowed herself to cry softly, staring at the peeling ceiling. "Am I doing the right thing?" she asked herself. But the next day, all it took was seeing the children's eyes light up as they recited the alphabet or solved a multiplication problem, and every doubt vanished. The third obstacle was the lack of resources. Books, notebooks, pencils. Everything was scarce. Camila improvised. She asked for used paper from local offices, reused notebooks with blank pages, made posters by hand. The clothes she sewed and sold helped cover the basics, but it was never enough. There were days she thought about giving up, when the cupboard was empty and the fridge barely had any beans. And as if that weren't enough, the biggest challenge was still to come: the insecurities of the streets. The neighborhood was known for the constant presence of local gangs, young people without opportunities, without schooling, who found in crime their only path. Some of these boys gave Camila dirty looks, as if her little school were an insult. They even tagged her wall with graffiti, wrote insults, and once even threw rocks at the garage roof. That night, Camila sat down with Lucía and said, "Here, maybe it's too dangerous to keep going." Lucía gripped her hand tightly and answered, firm as a grown-up, "Mama, we can't stop. And if we stop, who's going to take care of them?" That sentence echoed in Camila's soul. The fear was still there, but the courage was stronger. Camila also seemed to sense every tension. She always stood guard at the door, alert to every movement. Once, when a strange man tried to force his way in, she ran, barked, and chased him off. After that day, everyone began to say Camila wasn't just a mascot, but a true guardian of the project. Then on a hot Sunday, while Camila organized a small community feijoada to raise funds, the worst happened. A group of hooded young men drove by on motorcycles and fired shots into the air. The children screamed. Mothers dropped to the ground. Plates shattered on the pavement. Camila barked like never before, trying to protect everyone. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. Someone didn't want that little school to keep going. That night, Camila sat in silence for hours. She thought of everything she could lose: her home, her meager income, her own life. But above all, she thought of Lucía. What would happen to her if something went wrong? The fear was like a heavy shadow. And in that moment of deepest vulnerability, something unexpected happened. The next day, before Camila even opened the gate, she found a line of mothers and children outside. They were all there, each bringing something: a bag of rice, a few pesos, clothes to sell at a bazaar, used toys. One of the mothers, tears in her eyes, said, "Camila, if you give up, we lose everything. But if you keep going, we'll stand by your side." Camila looked at that scene, at those tired but steadfast women, and realized she wasn't alone. What was being born wasn't just a school. It was a united community. From then on, new challenges appeared, but also new strengths. A retired teacher who lived 2 blocks away volunteered to teach math. A young college student began coming twice a week to help with reading. And surprisingly, even some of the gang members, touched by Camila's determination, began to respect the space. One of them even left a box of colored pencils at the door, silently, like an apology. Camila remained through it all. During classes, she lay beside the children, soaking up their affection. At the mothers' meetings, she sat as if part of the discussion. On the most tense days, her mere presence was a reminder that even the abandoned can find a home and give meaning to many lives. Even so, the fight was far from over. The space was too small, food remained scarce, and social pressure still lingered. But Camila, standing tall in the face of it all, understood one simple, powerful truth. What is born of love, no fear can erase. And it was just when she thought she had found some balance that life decided to place one more test in her path. A test that would shake her strength, her faith, and show her once and for all just how far the heart of a brave mother can go. And when that moment arrived, neither Camila, nor Lucía, nor even Canela were prepared for the impact. Mornings in San Miguel were no longer the same. The neighborhood, once marked by the heavy silence of poverty and the distant echo of police sirens, now had a different sound. Laughter, songs, children's voices rehearsing impromptu choruses. All of it came from that garage that had turned into a classroom, a beating heart of hope. Camila, always with a colorful scarf in her hair and a smile that hid her exhaustion, was the center of this small universe. By her side, Lucía was growing up not only learning to read and write, but also understanding the meaning of courage. And Canela, the Labrador who had arrived as a shadow, now ran back and forth as guardian and mascot to them all. But life has a strange habit of testing even more those who dare to plant hope in barren soil. That year, a heavy storm hit Mexico City. It rained relentlessly for 3 days, and the small neighborhood of San Miguel suffered severe flooding. Water invaded homes, carried away furniture, dragged away memories. Camila's garage didn't stand a chance. The floor was soaked, books destroyed, handmade posters dissolved as if crying ink. When the children arrived, they found nothing but mud and silence. Camila tried to stay calm, but when she saw the pages floating in the water, she felt the weight of months of effort slipping through her fingers. She sat on the doorstep, covered her face with her hands, and for the first time in a long while, let despair win. Lucía, only 10 years old, came over, gently stroked her mother's hair, and whispered, "Mommy, we can start over, just like you always taught me." At that moment, Camila realized her daughter had already understood everything, that life is about rising again, even when everything seems lost. The next day, she called the mothers in the neighborhood. Together, they cleaned the garage, dried the walls, improvised shelves with produce crates. The destroyed posters were recreated by the children themselves, who painted letters and numbers with tempera paint. The space had never looked so beautiful, because now it wasn't just Camila's work, it was everyone's. And it was precisely this rebuilding that caught the attention of outsiders. A small local NGO, upon hearing the story, sent a journalist to visit the project. She arrived shyly, with a camera and notebook, She spent the whole day there, observing. She photographed Camila explaining math with pebbles on the floor, captured Lucía helping classmates spell words, and was moved to see Camila lying with 4 children leaning on her body as if she were a stuffed pillow. The story ran in the community newspaper. And then something extraordinary happened. People from different neighborhoods started showing up, bringing donations, notebooks, books, desks, chairs. A gentleman from the city center brought a new chalkboard. A retired teacher offered to give Portuguese and literature classes. Camila couldn't believe her eyes. That little garage was starting to become a reference point. But the most emotional moment came on a sunny Saturday, when the first symbolic graduation was held for the children who had learned to read and write with Camila. There were no caps or official diplomas, but there were colorful balloons, cut-out poster boards, and a handwritten banner. Today we celebrate the power of learning. The children came in one by one, announced by Lucía. They received simple certificates, made of paper, and signed by Camila. Each one read a sentence aloud, proving to everyone that they now knew how to read. Applause echoed through the streets. Neighbors came to their windows. Some even cried. And in the middle of it all, Camila ran around happily, wagging her tail, as if she understood the magnitude of the moment. Camila, overwhelmed with emotion, couldn't hold back the tears. She looked at her daughter and whispered, "It was worth it, daughter. All the effort, all the struggle, it was worth it." But life still had one more test in store. A few weeks later, while the children were studying, a black van parked on the street. 2 men in suits stepped out. They knocked on the gate and asked to speak with Camila. They were representatives of a private institution that offered scholarships to children from underprivileged communities. They had read about the project in the paper and wanted to see it up close. Camila welcomed them with humility. She showed them the space, told the story. The men listened in silence, observing every detail. In the end, one of them said, "Mrs. Camila, we've rarely seen something so genuine. We'd like to offer scholarships to 15 of these children." The impact was so great that Camila had to sit down. The mothers nearby cried with joy. It was the chance for a different future, real, tangible. That night, the garage was lit by a single dim bulb, but the light in Camila's eyes lit up everything. Sitting on the floor, with Lucía in her lap and Camila nestled against her legs, she gave thanks in silence. From that moment on, the project didn't stop growing. More volunteers came, more donations, and even a partnership with the local government. But for Camila, none of that was more important than the transformation she saw daily in the children's eyes. Self-esteem, confidence, joy. She knew she couldn't solve all the world's problems. She couldn't erase the violence in the streets or end the poverty surrounding San Miguel. But she had come to understand a profound truth. When a brave mother decides to fight, the impact goes far beyond her own home. It echoes, touches lives, and plants invisible seeds. And Camila, oh Camila, the Labrador who once arrived abandoned and wounded, was now a living symbol of all of this. With her gentle and protective nature, she had become an inseparable part of the story. The children saw her as a silent teacher who taught lessons of love, patience, and loyalty. To Camila, she was more than a mascot. She was a daily reminder that even the most broken can be reborn when they find love. On the last day of that improvised school year, Camila organized a small party. There was a piñata, music, and even a cake donated by a local bakery. When night fell, she gathered all the children in the courtyard and said, "Today we understand that it doesn't take much to change a life. All it takes is love and courage." The children applauded, and Lucía, proudly, added, "And you also need a mom like mine." The silence that followed was broken only by the clapping and Camila's bark, as if confirming every word. In that moment, Camila felt something she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just, pride or just gratitude. It was the certainty that no matter how hard the journey, she had fulfilled her role, not just as Lucia's mother, but as a mother to an entire community. And as the stars emerged in the Mexican sky, one truth echoed in the hearts of everyone present. The fight of a brave mother can transform not just a garage into a school, but an entire neighborhood into hope. And so, among laughter, hugs, and the shining eyes of a dog once forgotten, now a symbol of rebirth, Camila's story wasn't ending. On the contrary, it was only just beginning. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to keep walking with us. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video so more people can witness the strength of a brave mother like Camila. Every subscription, every gesture of support is like an extended hand that helps spread hope. Because when stories like this reach the world, we're reminded that love can always find a way, even in the most unlikely of places.